Over the next 25 minutes, we're going to be listening to a debate between a proponent of medically assisted suicide, doctor-involved suicide. There are plenty of names for it, and somebody who is absolutely against it. We try to keep these debates, this is the third of them, on a formal basis. So I'm going to give each of our debaters, Professor Willem, the Executive Director of Dignity South Africa, and Philip Rosenthal, the Coordinator of Euthanasia Exposed, 5 minutes each to state their opening position. And after that, we'll swap 3 minutes for each. I'm not going to, at 3 minutes exactly, gong one out, but if by 3 minutes and 15 seconds there's not a clear sign that somebody is coming to an end with the point they're trying to make, then I will interrupt and say, please, can we move over? And then each will have an opportunity to sum up the points that they think need re-stressing, or the points that the debating opponent has made that they think need further dismantling. Professor Willem Landman and Philip Rosenthal, a very good afternoon to you both. Willem, would you start us off, please, by telling us why you think I should be able to enlist the aid of a willing medical practitioner to help me to die?
John, there are several ethical arguments, but we can go into them and look at some of them. I think there's a solid ethical foundation for wanting doctors to aid certain patients in dying. But I think there's also a constitutional argument, and I think that is probably the one that's the strongest if we are going to have a stalemate when it comes to ethical arguments. But briefly, the ethical arguments are, firstly, autonomy. We believe that people make their own life choices according to their own values and preferences and beliefs and principles throughout their lives. Now, if your life ends in a way that no one wishes upon one another, on anyone else, in agony and with considerable suffering, why would we deny autonomy right at the end? So autonomy, making our life choices is the one argument. The other one is an argument from consistency. We already have medical practices where we decide about life and death, where we have to decide whether to withhold or withdraw treatment, do not resuscitate orders, for example. So life and death are at issue in those decisions. What is the difference between those decisions and simply helping somebody right at the end of life who suffers? And that brings us to the third argument, that is suffering. We all know that our lives will end, but the path we walk towards the end may differ. Will certainly differ from one person to another. Some will die peacefully of natural causes without much suffering. Some will die instantaneously from injury or accident without any suffering at all. By contrast, there are those who die of natural causes or injury or accident in a way that is suffused with suffering, brought on by pain and distress, or both. And such suffering may be so extreme that it's unbearable and intractable. And the counter-argument may be that palliative care can take care of that suffering. Well, palliative care in the extreme may induce a situation where somebody sort of drifts, is in a state of disorientation, when you drift from consciousness to unconsciousness. And some people will say, I don't want that. Or if you put me, if the only way in which you can treat my suffering is to terminally sedate me so that I am completely and irreversibly unconscious until my body dies, somebody may say, I don't want that. So these would be my arguments that, that other people do not have the right to tell me or to anybody else in that situation, in that dire situation at the end of life, how to die, that we should be abandoned in a sense. So those would be my opening moves. There are constitutional rights that we can talk about, but these are the ethical arguments.
Okay, that's opening salvo from Professor Willem Landman, of Executive Director of Dignity South Africa, Philip Rosenthal, Coordinator of Euthanasia Exposed. Philip, good afternoon to you. You have 5 minutes to state the case why I should not be allowed to ask a doctor, or I can ask, but a doctor should refuse my request that that doctor help me end my life.
Okay, well, I'd like to start off with, firstly, the position of the sanctity of human life in general, then we go to some of these specific questions. I think that we can draw an analogy that if you're walking on the road and you see a dead bird, you walk on, you see a dead person, you call the police. So you know there's a difference between a person and a bird intuitively. In terms of the Christian position, one has the command, you shall not murder, and we have case law from the Bible where King Saul was in the process of death. Somebody ran him through. That person was executed for murder. And we don't have any indication of an exception in these types of instances. One's then got the Hippocratic Oath, which has been the standard for medicine in our civilization. But we also have a history which is littered with violations of the sanctity of human life, which are very tragic whenever that boundary has not been respected, either by the state or other people. Now, my question for Dignity SA is, if they are letting go of that standard that has held up our civilization when it has been performing properly for the last several thousand years, what do they have in substitute as a boundary? And they have so far been unable to give me a clear answer in 3 previous debates, and I hope for one in this one. But the answers that they give are elastic, so that they define it in terms of, as this person said, intractable suffering. But then they put that down to each person's individual definition of what that suffering is. But the difficulty is that everybody who is suicidal thinks that their situation is unbearable. So they have no definite criteria of where they are going to draw the line. And what we've seen over the last several years is that they keep shifting that boundary. So, and likewise, the countries that have legalized this overseas have kept shifting the boundary. And each time, Dignity SA just follows along with that shift in the boundary. So my question is, where are they going to stop? These questions about autonomy, nobody lives an entirely autonomous life. We are strongly influenced by other people. We have to obey the rules of the road. We have limits on what we are allowed to do. And I'd argue that this limit is something which is in the best interests of everybody, because essentially, with this open-ended definition, Dignity SA position can lead to a general right for suicide on demand for anybody, because they don't seem to define any sort of limits. And furthermore, they have now gone on to support a leader who has openly confessed to
perhaps Philip, make it. Perhaps Philip, don't do personal attacks and just keep it to matters of ethics, matters of law.
Well, look, my question is, where is this going to stop? Because even in the public statements, one cannot see where that is going to stop. They haven't taken a line which one can stop that just drifting. Now, what we've seen with disastrous situations in other countries where these things are kept drifting, and we've seen, for example, in places like Belgium and Canada, disabled people are saying, well, they are being put under pressure from other people who suggest that they should commit suicide. One has less disabled children in these countries. For me, this is a very tragic situation. I believe we should value the lives of the disabled people who are struggling and in pain, just the same as everybody else. Their lives mustn't be devalued just because of that disability. Then in terms of this consistency, there's a question here that we're debating, which is the active boundary of killing. And I'm saying that boundary needs to be kept to stop the murder of innocent people.
Philip, thank you. That's
debate.
That's your 5 minutes. Let's go back to Professor Willem Landman of Dignity SA. You're accused, Willem, at Dignity SA of having no boundary, having an eternally shifting boundary, that there is no point at which you would not consider assisted suicide being wrong.
John, I just simply I fail to understand what Philip is trying to say there. What is at issue is what a society decides it can live with and what it is comfortable with. That is what's happened in every other jurisdiction. What will happen in South Africa, there will be a case taken to the court where the court will be asked to declare that there is an inconsistency between the common law and the Constitution, and that we should iron out that inconsistency. The court will basically say our law needs to be reviewed. Who can review that law? Who can ensure that the common law is in line with the Constitution's demands or the constitutional rights? That's all that the court can do. It will be for the people to decide. If the court tells the people, the lawmakers, that you should write a law that irons out these tensions, South Africans will decide. There will be public debates. There will be submissions made. There will be public hearings. And we will draw the line that we're comfortable with. We may draw the line, for example, where the Americans have drawn it, only allowing assisted suicide and not euthanasia. That's what all the American states have done. Other countries have been more permissive. I agree with Philip. They're not all the same. Some are more permissive. But it's not been a slide down a slippery slope. It's been a rational process where it's been debated where what people in those jurisdictions would find comfortable to live with. So there is no drawing of lines. It is what a society feels comfortable with. The whole notion of a slippery slope is completely misguided. You look at all the reports from all the jurisdictions where assisted dying is legal. You'll see that there are responsible reports coming out every 5 years in Holland, every year in Oregon, and you can trace what is happening there. There's no sort of drawing a line that we're slipping down a slippery slope where people will, family members and doctors will murder their patients. That's absolute nonsense.
All right, let's bring Philip Rosenthal in. Absolute nonsense, says Willem Landman. Philip, can you conceive of any situation where a set of rules is agreed to through a dialogue between the courts and the country's constitution, which will allow strictly regulated and controlled assisted suicide?
Well, no, but I would firstly argue that, with respect, Professor Landman has not clearly answered my question. He's dodged it, but I will answer what he said. If one looks at the question of the society has decided no, they don't want assisted suicide. We've had several rounds of discussion on this, starting in 1999. Almost all organizations opposed this idea. In terms of this claim that it's in the Constitution, firstly, that was definitely by no means the intention of the framers of the Constitution, correctly interpreted. One may find some judge who decides to twist its meaning, as did Fabricius, but one hopes that doesn't happen at the higher court. Then the second issue is that in terms of our equality legislation, if you start to allow it for one hard case, that hard case can then just push to slightly less and slightly less to slightly less for another case. And it's going to be pretty well impossible to stop that slide legally.
Why do you assume that there will be a slide? That if society and the courts together set a a collection of rules that say under these conditions, A, B, C, D, F, only when they have been fulfilled is physician-assisted suicide legal. Why do you imagine that that will not remain the ruling standard? There will be an immediate slippage from that.
Well, firstly, it happened in Germany in the 1930s. Secondly, it's happening, contrary to what Professor Landman says, in Europe and in the American states, that the number of assisted suicides in Oregon, I've graphed them, it's rising exponentially. In terms of Holland, there has been an increase in slippage year by year, moving to the situation where in Belgium, children are being euthanized. The whole issue of consent is pushed. So one had a doctor that was not prosecuted for killing a person who had not got a proper, valid invitation of consent and was given coffee and restrained with some poison. Then there is this question of this issue of the people have decided. The polls in South Africa are firmly against the legalization of euthanasia. The parliament is firmly against it. I think that Dignity SA kind of took a chance and got a judge that was sympathetic at the...
Again, you're going personal, Philip. Please do not use personal attacks in this debate.
Okay. Well, the thing is that, but furthermore, they have still not defined what their boundary is. They are just saying, well, they will go with whatever the inverted commas the society will consent to. Now, the current consensus is against that. One also has seen...
I'm not sure you know how that consensus is against it. There's been no full testing of it. But let's go now to... You've had your 3 minutes. So, Willem Landman, can you perhaps then, in response to Philip Rosenthal's accusation that Dignity SA has no line drawn in the sand, we heard what you said about that line in the sand need to be drawn by society. But from Dignity SA's point of view, are there a set of rules that have to be strictly adhered to before physician-assisted suicide can happen?
John, Dignity SA is a tiny organization that tries to decriminalize or set in motion decriminalization of assisted dying. We have no preconceived ideas of what the South African society will decide. We just simply say we have a constitution that superseded the common law. Amongst others, that constitution says that there's bodily autonomy, there's dignity that should be respected. There's several those I would say are the two cornerstones, constitutional rights that should be respected. On top of that, the Supreme Court of Appeal said that if a proper case is brought to the court, in other words, not an urgent application as was the case in Stranson Ford, the legal position will change, not might change, it will change if a proper case is brought to the court. So it's nothing to do with Dignity SA. We just say, let's clarify the legal situation. And in other words, let's move on to actually society deciding what we are comfortable with. It's not for Dignity SA to decide. Basically that's it.
Then Philip, you used the example of Saul in the Old Testament, and I've had a lot of listeners saying the minute you mentioned Christian religion, you lost them. This is a secular country which is guided by secular principles in a secular constitution. Please will you tell me why I am not able to ask a doctor who is trained and willing to help me die to do so?
Okay, well, firstly, I don't accept your premise there, but we can have another debate on that another time. That is an authority for a very large proportion of the country, maybe not for yourself.
Not for the Constitution, Philip. You can't wish that away.
Answer
my question.
Christians are allowed to express their views within the Constitution, and other people will agree with them in public debate. But in terms of this interpretation of the Constitution, these are two very vague points, which are amongst many other points in the Constitution that need to be considered in context in terms of the original intent of the framers of the Constitution, which I can assure you did not include legalizing euthanasia. If they had wanted to, they could have put that in at the time. That was not anticipated at the time. But one has very good reasons for limiting the crime of murder. Now, there's two reasons one can consider. If we just put aside the teaching of the Bible and you look just conceptually. Firstly, they cannot put down a set of rules which is actually enforceable by the police. Your witness is dead, okay? You have people who are suicidal, who are fluctuating, who are changing their minds by the week as to whether they want to commit suicide or not. In most of these countries, the people who are regulating the assisted suicide practitioners are, in fact, other practitioners, and they are not going to find one of their colleagues guilty because then they put themselves at risk, so they protect each other. Then you have doctor shopping, which is that if one doctor will not agree to something, the person simply goes to another doctor. One also has the weakening of the law so that people simply continue breaking the law beyond any boundaries that are now put in place, which are now more difficult to enforce because you cannot properly regulate what is going on. So they have. I have seen some other proposals of what other people have put forward, and there are forward proposals which are not going to work. But my debating opponent has not been able to put forward what their proposal is, which actually can work. But then one also has the difficulty. People are influenced by what other people say and by circumstances around them and what is being promoted as societal values, and in fact by what is a social consensus themselves. So one has many more people in these countries now, up to 1 out of 20 of every single person who is dying who is now choosing these things, whereas in the beginning it was just a tiny proportion. And my question is, where is that all going to stop? There are many suicidal people in the world. Most of us would agree it's a bad thing when somebody commits suicide.
I'm not sure we're talking about suicide in the sense of my life is miserable, I'm depressed, I have no friends, I want to commit suicide. We're talking about people who are in the final stages of a medical medical condition for which there is no cure and whose death is assured. And what they want to do is hasten that death to reduce the suffering that they will otherwise inevitably go through.
Okay, well, firstly, we can debate that question ethically, but that is not what Dignity SA is proposing. That is what they started off proposing. They have moved to a much more radical position
And I'm going to leave it there with you, Philip, because you've had well in excess of the 3 minutes. And Willem, we have a minute and a half. If you could wrap up in that time, please.
John, let me put on the table what we're doing at the moment. We put a legal team together, and we will approach a court. It will probably be the North Gauteng High Court to declare that there's an unbearable tension between the common law and the Constitution. The court cannot write a law. Only Parliament can do that. But Parliament, as it happened in Canada, Parliament can instruct the court to write a law that would iron out this tension. In other words, basically write a law that says, under these conditions, South Africans can legally receive aid in dying. For that, we need to put a lot of evidence together. We're in the process of doing that, and we'll approach a court. Will be opposed by the Minister of Justice, by the Minister of the usual suspects, Minister of Health, etc. We would oppose it on a matter of principle, but we're going to proceed with it because we believe South Africans have a right to be assisted in their suffering right at the end, and that doesn't constitute murder. It simply is a compassionate deed for which people have a right to appeal to, and we're simply going to proceed with that.
And there we must leave it. We're out of time. Thank you very much to Philip Rosenthal, coordinator of Euthanasia Exposed, and Professor Willem Landman, Executive Director of Dignity SA.